This video is sponsored by Keeps. More on them later. Languages sure are funny. I can say that as someone who only really knows one language and just pretends that the time he spent at school learning French was helpful, because as a native English speaker, the idea that someone is making completely different sounds with their mouth and yet trying to communicate roughly the same message is honestly very strange. It's that part of your brain that is able to think in two distinct languages that is incredibly useful to the sort of translators tasked with localizing video games for other regions, an often thankless job that, if done well, goes almost completely unnoticed. You rarely hear about localization unless something has gone horribly wrong and a game that originated in Japanese has text or spoken word in it that is so horribly distorted that it takes on a completely new meaning altogether. And hey, sometimes this is wonderful and uniquely funny, but it is still bad localization and something that I want to look into further in today's video. And hopefully I won't lose my grasp of English along the way. This will the create rested the for video very difficult to understood. I know we like to point and laugh at bad translations and hilariously awful Engrish, but before we do any of that, I want to remind everyone how incredibly difficult it is to translate an entire video game. The best analogy I can think of is how tricky it is for 2 out of 3 guys to keep all of their hair on their head before they turn 35. But thankfully, this video sponsors Keeps aren't very good at translating from Japanese to English or vice versa, but they are really good at making sure that, people keep the hair on their heads. So maybe they should just stick to that and stop trying to translate video games. If you have any concerns about your hair's long-term ability to function as, hair, then Keeps are the experts that you're looking for with their lengthy list of successful cases from previous clients where they've helped to restore hair to thinning scalps. Of course, hair loss is different from one guy to the next, and Keeps recognize this, which is why their treatment packages come in 3 different variants based on what type of hair loss you're experiencing and would like to fix. Plus, you can get everything shipped directly to your door, so you don't have to wait for the world to sort itself out before you can fix your hair. Keeps' treatment packages are already cheaper than their competitors, but with the deal they're running with me, you can save even more money. For a limited time offer, you can go to keeps.com/rabbid or click the link in the description to receive 50% off your first order. Stop hair loss now before it's too late. Correct then, shall our talk around baddie localizations? Shit, it happened again, didn't it? Back when I got into what the internet could offer me and realised that there was more to see beyond porn, I became very interested in badly translated video games. This is where I ran into a classic among mistranslated games that has transcended the game that it originated from by way of what I remember being one of the first internet memes I ever saw. If I showed you a bunch of different gameplay footage, you likely wouldn't be able to pick Zero Wing out of a lineup since it's a horizontal space shooter from the late 1980s, and there were fucking tons of those around at that time, but few of them have a legacy as enduring and as accidental as Zero Wing, because damn, that sure is a lot of words that don't make sense. There isn't even a lot of text in this game because of all the space shooting that you need to be doing, but it only takes about 90 seconds for this game to write itself into the Video Game Hall of Fame for life. And all because something called Cats took all of those bases. Hey, I watched that movie, all that it stole was my appreciation for living. I'm always a little happier to give leeway to older games for their mistakes, especially because localization wasn't given the same priority as it should be given these days, and that's quite obvious given how many high-profile games end with some variation of congratulations or something like that, so I understand that older games are going to make these mistakes. That being said, we still remember Zero Wing specifically for some incredibly bad translations. So it's gotta be good, you just know. Sort of. It's strange to look back on with Zero Wing because it's hardly a bad game, but these days it's only really known for its introduction that sets the scene against a backdrop of some phenomenally botched English. I don't know what you kids are doing on the internet these days, but most people on this site over a certain age will be immediately familiar with All Your Base Belong to Us. a sentence that when translated properly is meant to say, with the help of Federation government forces, Cats has taken all of your bases. I want to say that this is an easy mistake, one that would be made again and again throughout this short intro, but there's some real charm to just how poor these translations are. The reason why is pretty simple, because the localization was handled by a member of the devs' export and overseas team, who predictably didn't speak a whole lot of English. So really it's impressive that he got this close, and perhaps if they hired someone bilingual, Zero Wing wouldn't be as memorable as it is today. For great justice indeed. If you've ever seen one of my videos before, then you might know that sometimes with some topics I don't really know what metrics I'm judging them on until roughly halfway through the video, or I'll sort of hone in on one thing and, focus on talking about that and deciding how things are ranked based on that. It's more of the same here, and I've kind of decided that localizations are bad if they alter the game in some significant way and change what the game is via some translations. And Zero Wing's here too, because it's just cute. It's like I said at the beginning, localization done well will probably go unnoticed, and that's the best you could ever hope for. Japanese and English are two incompatible languages that are hard to translate without losing meaning or fudging idioms, and so if you're making any kind of complex story with layers of symbolism and character growth, you have to be so careful that nothing gets lost in translation. Surprisingly, a prime candidate for this would be Metroid Other M, a game given infamy for the changes it made to the world of Metroid and how Samus Aran is characterized. Gone are the days of the silent, stoic bounty hunter who gets the job done without any questions, and now half the game is narrated by Samus's inner monologue that drones on about babies and why Adam Senpai won't be nice to her. And even the good stuff in Other M gets drowned out by a pretty terrible story. But what if I told you that Other M had a lot more to it than what English-speaking countries had translated for us? Is this a game that is only the way it is because of some bad translation? Not quite, but certainly some of the story becomes a lot better and clearer when you understand exactly what the writers were trying to tell the player. Other M is a game full of metaphors that usually aren't all that subtle, but are written in a way so as to lift the veil on Samus's character and highlight her inner struggle with weakness. There's a lot of nuance in the Japanese text that isn't carried over to English, ranging from plot stuff like how the traitor in the Federation's ranks is still pulling strings by the end, and that's how Nightmare ends up in Metroid Fusion, to character traits like how Japanese Samus isn't enamored with Adam as a means of endearing him to the player, but instead merely respectful of his authority and their past of working together. It's more of a professional relationship and less like, "Oh, Adam, please notice me." The English version of Other M is a massive missed opportunity that flattens out any interesting themes in favour of painting its characters as extremes of how they were originally written, and while you can't blame the writers for how the localization team interpreted their work, this ultimately demonstrates how much Other M relies on telling you stuff instead of simply showing you. I know Samus has a lot to say in this game, and Other M was always like to use her inner thoughts to help, but with a lot of these metaphors and themes being portrayed and elaborated on by Samus, it left the door wide open for some shoddy translation tainting the whole experience. If you're interested in hearing someone talk about Other M's localization in far more detail, Lexicon Lookout made an amazing video last year all about what changed with this game when it was translated, and I implore you to check it out. Never thought I'd look at Metroid Other M in a semi-positive light. I feel dirty just thinking about it. The recent success of Persona 5 warms the cockles of my heart. It's hardly like the 5th game in this franchise is head and shoulders above everything that came before, but it felt like Persona finally got the mainstream recognition that it usually deserved, but hasn't always received. Seeing Persona 5 nominated for a bunch of awards felt like a mark of progress that started as a sub-series of Shin Megami Tensei, with Revelations Persona in 1996, which set the scene and formula for future games, but not the language, I guess? Now that we're done with alien shooty games, the rest of this video is full of RPGs, which should be a surprise to absolutely no one watching, since have you seen the amount of text found in your average role-playing game? These are hefty experiences full of people talking, and if you haven't got a team of talented translators, you're gonna have a whole heap of trouble on your hands. It's little wonder how Persona 1 became such a train wreck, really? To be fair, this game had its day eventually thanks to a PSP port 13 years later that had a second, far more successful stab at localization. But what was released in 1996 is kinda ridiculous to look back on with the benefit of hindsight, and decades of Persona games not sounding like a bunch of the wrong words being vomited out of the characters' mouths. The localization team was small and mostly ill-equipped to take on a challenge this sizable, especially since a lot of the Japanese references were deemed to be inappropriate for a Western audience and needed to be altered to appeal to that demographic, which is really hard to do without a healthy aptitude for both languages. Revelation's persona underwent some heavy changes for its North American release, with the expected renaming of characters being joined by that strange reluctance to embrace Japanese culture so that Western players weren't scared away by foreign references. Then there's the more contentious changes, like how most characters had their skin lightened and hair color altered, except for Mark, who is now black because America, I guess? But Atlas forgot to change this line about being able to tell that the good guys aren't zombies because their faces are white, so yeah, that's a problem. Not to mention that a whole chunk of the game is missing because Atlas didn't have enough time to translate it, and all in all, Revelation's persona is a bit of a mess from a localization standpoint. It's a cult classic now, but at the time when you're trying to convince a new audience to become invested in this series, I'm surprised Atlas got anywhere with it. Sometimes it's best to leave well enough alone. I'm writing and making this video the week before E3, and with the video due to go up 2 days before Nintendo Showcase, I'm sure most Nintendo fans are hyper-focused on only one thing that contains the word Breath of and 2. That's an issue for later, if it even happens, but for now, no video about awful attempts at localizing video games would be complete without a discussion over the quality of Breath of Fire 2's translation. Considering what we've been discussing so far, the fact that this game is a lengthy JRPG from the 90s that wasn't translated by the same guy who worked on the original should spell out exactly what went wrong with Breath of Fire 2 and why. But I know what you want to see, and that's examples of bad localization. I don't think this video would be anywhere near as fun if I told you that a game was badly translated without also showing you just how badly. Maybe Other M should have done a bit more of that. The notion of bad localization always feels like it's pinning the blame on a company or group of individuals who are just lazy and don't really care about localization, or they leave it to the last minute and they just create some terrible abomination. In reality, while that is the case with some localizations, often it's a case of just running out of time, or in the case of Breath of Fire 2, just not having enough talent behind it. But they gave it a go, I can give them credit for that, but not enough credit to not talk about them. And that's basically the big problem with Breath of Fire 2, because Ted Woolsey, who had done some brilliant work translating the original Breath of Fire and would go on to add Final Fantasy VI, Chrono Trigger and Super Mario RPG to his CV, masquerading as a Hall of Fame that highlights the size of the hole his absence left in Capcom's localization department. As a result, Breath of Fire 2 isn't as horrifically inaccurate as some of the other games I've talked about today, but almost every text box in the game has at least something wrong with it. Whether it's typos or spelling mistakes or phrasing mistakes or this one. I want to say it's nothing major because it doesn't turn Breath of Fire 2 into a terrible game or anything, but you can feel the bad localization everywhere, and that makes it worth highlighting. Clearly Capcom USA didn't quite have the talent to pull this off, but I think Breath of Fire 2 is more of a victim of not having someone who can go through the game's text and work on a second draft. Still though, in a decade that also gave us Earthbound, the wacky dialogue helps give Breath of Fire 2 some memorable, albeit unintentional, charm. At times it feels like the wrong sort of sequel. I never like throwing out #1 slots based on reputation, but occasionally I find myself backed into a corner by the complete and utter inevitability that is Pokemon Vietnamese Crystal. Initially, I was very reluctant to talk about this game because it is, after all, an unofficial bootleg that has been fan-translated by an unknown source that can't be used as any kind of representation of what translators do on a regular basis. I don't know what the localization scene looks like in Vietnam, but either way, this version of Pokemon Crystal gained a lot of notoriety for the quality, or lack thereof, of its localization. It's perfectly understandable because if Crystal was translated by, at best, a group of amateurs, then the least you'd expect is some shaky knowledge of the English language. Anyway, drug bag fuck. It's just how I remember it. So, by my own criteria of a localization altering the game, this is a sight to behold that breaks down the established structure of Pokemon Crystal in favour of garbled English words seemingly chosen at random. It's hard to appreciate the qualities that the second generation of Pokemon has to offer when everyone is speaking in sentences that are even more broken than that one member of Team Rocket you meet in the post-game. Vietnamese Crystal is effectively a more ridiculous version of Breath of Fire 2, wherein every tiny part of the game is infected with bad localization, but in a way that fundamentally changes how you experience the game. Gameplay itself is completely unchanged, but with so much of the text changed instead, it becomes more of a transformative adventure where you fight wild laps to help Elf Monster use some drug to make some sense of all this shit. And I suppose it kind of resembles Pokemon, but it's just so distracting. Possibly a great endorsement of the work that professional translators do, but also just, like, a lot of fun. To be honest, if I had to translate Crystal into French, this is probably what we'd end up with, just not in English. Yes, I'd also try to squeeze some swear words in there. Why the drug bag? Fuck not.
This is RabbidLuigi, and Pokemon Vietnamese Crystal definitely walks the path of being so bad that it's good, to the extent that I would genuinely love it if there were more Pokemon games out there with this level of bad translation. And while there's definitely other equivalents for other generations out there, there's just not quite the same as the awe you get from Vietnamese Crystal. It's a sign that you too could translate an entire video game if you want to. I mean, you probably shouldn't, but, you know, at least it'll be entertaining.
Hi, just want to give a quick shout out to some of my top supporters on Patreon. We have Ramon Alberto, Jerome Kiryu, Fusion Warrior, Sarah Malion, Christopher Robinson, Joe Creamer, Scott Riker, Frank Guillong, I think, I'm so sorry, The Green Scorpion, Devon Hutt, and Ferretto. Thank you all for supporting what I do on YouTube, and if you want to join them, you can go to patreon.com/RabbidLuigi, where I post updates and behind the scenes stuff, and we generally have a really good time. Also, what topic would you like to see me cover next? Leave your suggestion in a comment on this video, because I'll be taking the best ideas and making a poll on my community tab, which you can then vote on to decide what the next video is about. I'll be announcing the winner of the poll over on my Twitter, so make sure you follow me so you don't miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.